What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I have the fourth and final divisions prediction video in store for you. In my last three, I've covered the Atlantic, the Metro, and the Central, and today we have the fourth and final division in the Pacific. Now this one to me was one of the more challenging ones to talk about. The top four are really hard to compare, as well as the bottom four being pretty tough to compare as well. But we went through each one, and today I'm going to be sharing my predictions for the upcoming season. So if you guys have been enjoying the content lately and you want to follow along with this series and other ones that I post on my channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button now. It'll let you know whenever I post new content like this, and let's get right into this one. Coming in at number 8, this is where I have a pretty obvious team in the San Jose Sharks. Unfortunately, they're not going to be a great hockey team for the 24-25 season, but their future is arguably one of the best in the NHL. This offseason, they draft with their first overall pick, Macklin Celebrini. They bring in top free agents like Tyler Toffoli and Alex Wennberg, and they're also finally getting Will Smith to play in his first season with the organization. So like I said, they're young talent. There's a ton of potential here with this team. Unfortunately, though, their defense and their goaltending, it's very below average. Their top line consisting of Ferrero and Emberson, and it doesn't get much better below that, as well as their goaltending with Vanacek and Blackwood. It just doesn't exactly scream playoff team to me. But I don't think that's what the Sharks are trying to do. I think they're continuing to tank a bit, developing their players, and trying to build more for a future rather than trying to win a cup next season, especially because they know they're not even a playoff contending team. I love the direction that the Sharks are heading into. I think that they're pushing all of the right buttons right now, and they're having a pretty quick rebuild. I can see them finishing last in the division again, which is where most of their fans probably want them to finish to get a higher draft pick again. So I think it's pretty obvious they're going to be the 8th worst team in the Pacific Division. Coming in at number 7, this is where I have the Calgary Flames, a fall from grace for this organization, and it all really began with the Matthew Tkachuk and Jonathan Huberdeau movements. Tkachuk obviously traded to Florida for Jonathan Huberdeau, a guy who just hasn't lived up to the contract that he signed, as well as Johnny Gaudreau leaving in free agency and having the team sign players like Nazem Kadri, who just also aren't playing up to the potential the Flames thought they could reach. Their defense looks very lackluster. They traded away all of their assets, including Hanifin, Tanev, Mangiapane, Lindholm, and Markstrom more recently to the New Jersey Devils. It's unfortunate. The team just doesn't look like they're capable of making a playoff spot right now. They're also not one of the worst teams in the league, which means they're probably not going to get that first or second overall pick. It's just unfortunate. They really don't have a direction right now. Their future looks very, very dark, at least for the next 3 to 5 years. For Flames fans, hang in there. At least they're finally committing to a rebuild, because this roster on paper just wasn't good enough to win a Stanley Cup. There are a few promising pieces like Wolf and Zari, but at this point, I wouldn't expect the Flames to even be a top 5 team in their division. I have them finishing at number 7. Unfortunate, but hopefully we can see a few bright spots for this organization as they head down this path to rebuild. Coming in at number 6, this is where I have the Anaheim Ducks. I wanted them to be one spot higher, but I feel like I'm just one season too early on my Ducks projection. I love this team. I love the rebrand they just did. I think we're entering this fun new era of Ducks hockey. Their forward group, to me, it's insanely talented. Leo Carlson, Cutter Gauthier, Troy Terry, Ryan Strome, Trevor Zegras, Vetrano, Fabry, McTavish, and then Killorn, maybe one of their worst signings that they've made in recent memory. I still think he's going to contribute on this team and provide a little bit of veteran leadership, but honestly, I think that the sky is going to be the limit for them in the next 5 years. But for this season, I do think that they're still going to need some development. Hopefully Trevor Zegras can bounce back from that down year he had because of injury. Leo Carlson can continue to develop. Cutter Gauthier can slot in and provide more goal scoring. I think that their forward group is pretty solid right now, but they're just young and very inexperienced and will need a little bit more time. Their defense just isn't really doing it for me. They're just younger and don't really have the talent to protect their goaltending in any way, which is why we've seen John Gibson struggle over the past couple of seasons. But they did draft a few young players like Mityakov and, of course, Beckett Sinecki in this draft. So I think that they're going to be heading in the right direction in a lot of ways. But this upcoming season, for Ducks fans, just keep being patient. It's a fun time to be a fan of the organization, but you're probably not going to make the playoffs. Now, if they do somehow surprise us all and get into the wild card, trust me, there's going to be no bigger fan of this kind of move than me, but I just can't really see it happening with the current defense and goaltending that they're rocking with. So I have them finishing at number 6. Coming in at number 5, this is where I have the Seattle Kraken. Again, I actually have the Kraken missing the playoffs. I just don't see this team progressing in any way. They bring in Chandler Stevenson and Brandon Montour, two of arguably the worst contracts that were signed in the offseason. Obviously, they have Matty Beniers and Shane Wright, who could continue developing into some solid players that this organization can build around. But outside of that, they're sort of aging. They're not a young roster, but they're not an old roster. They're not competing for a cup, but they're also not in a rebuild. It's just a strange time to be in the Kraken's organization or to be a fan of this organization. I don't know. I want to say it's a bit directionless like the Flames, but they're definitely in a better situation than the Flames. I have them missing the playoffs. I think their floor is really low and their ceiling is average wildcard team at best. If they do make the playoffs, they could be a threat because of what we saw a couple of years ago, but for right now, I can't justify putting the Kraken any higher. Hopefully their free agency signings actually work out for them. Hopefully Shane Wright can continue to develop, and hopefully Matty Beniers gets out of this sophomore slump and this team can put out a competitive roster next season and potentially get themselves back in the mix of things. Coming in at number 4, this is where I have the Los Angeles Kings, a team that I think has done a very poor job of managing their assets over the past couple of years. Obviously losing in that Pierre-Luc Dubois trade and then having to move him to Washington just to get Darcy Kemper in return. Their biggest weakness to me has been their goaltending. They continue to not have a reliable starter year in and year out, filling that hole with veteran guys like they did last year in Talbot and now Kemper this year. Their defense to me, it's fine. It's not the best thing in the world. Obviously, when you have guys like Anderson and Doughty, you're not exactly the greatest defense, but you're still going to be able to protect your blue line. The depth there is fine. Gavrikov, Clark, Edmondson, and Spence, they're all going to be okay for the Kings. It's not, like I said, going to thread the needle, but you should be able to get some production from them. Their forward group, though, I love their top 6, and I do think they have some good depth. Obviously, Kopitar, Kempe, Byfield, that's a great top line to me. And then Deneau, Moore, and Fiala, also a great producing second line. I just really can't see this team finishing any higher than 4th. I think it's basically the same roster as last year. They didn't make any upgrades, and you could actually argue they got a little bit worse. I have the Kings finishing at number 4. I think potentially they could be a serious contender, but they sort of just get in their own way. Hopefully a new head coach and hopefully this system and them developing will give this team a little bit more structure, and they can prepare to kind of get out of the slump that they've been in for at least the past 3 years. Coming in at number 3, this is where I have the Vegas Golden Knights, a team that should still be very competitive next season. And the only reason I have them at number 3 is because I do expect the other 2 teams ahead of them to be a lot more competitive and probably just have a little bit more rounded out rosters. But taking a look at this lineup, Jack Eichel, Olofsson, and Barbashev as a top line is solid, and then having Hurdle and Stone and Carlson still on the roster, you're still going to be competitive. Now, they did lose Stevenson, and of course they lost Marchessault, which should be a bit of a blow, but their defense to me has always been the calling card for this organization. Pietrangelo and now Hanifin as your top line is one of the best if you just look across the NHL, and still having some depth with McNabb, Theodore, and then of course Whitecloud. I also think their goaltending is a little bit more rounded out now, with Aiden Hill being the clear starter and then having Samsonov as the backup, as opposed to having Logan Thompson breathing over Hill's neck as he continues to question whether or not he's the starter or the backup or if they're tandeming. I think this just kind of adds some clarity to Hill as he continues into next season, proving that he's still one of the top goalies in the NHL. I like this roster. I think that they're still going to be competitive. Of course, you know they're going to be involved in any sort of free agent signing or trade deadline, rumors and all of that nonsense. And of course, we all know that Mark Stone's going to be injured at the end of the season. They're going to bring in more talent. So expect Vegas to continue to be good. The only thing is if they can stay healthy. Obviously, they've had some run-ins with that department. Eichel, Stone, they're not always on the ice for full seasons, which can be a bit complicated for any organization. But I still expect Vegas to be competitive next season, and I have them actually finishing at number 3. Coming in at number 2, this is where I have the Vancouver Canucks. Again, this might be a little bit of a shock to Canucks fans, but I think that the top 2 spots are going to finish within a point or 2 of each other, so you could kind of move them up if you wanted to. I don't think it makes that big of a difference. Their forward group, to me, relatively the same. They bring in Jake DeBrusk, Sprong, Heinen, and Sherwood. Obviously, they lose players like Lindholm, who should be a bit of a blow to them, but who knows, he wasn't really great with the organization once he was traded there. Never really fit in chemistry-wise. They lose Zadorov on their blue line, but bring in Forbert to replace it, which should be maybe a little bit less toughness, but sort of kind of the same thing. And then their goaltending, very good. Solov, Stemko, that's one of the best pairings in the NHL right now. I think the Canucks are going to get a little bit better than they were last year. They finally got some playoff experience for their young guys. Quinn Hughes wins the Norris. Elias Pettersson continues to be a top 10 center in the NHL. Hopefully this experience of playoff hockey will kind of work out for them in the end. They didn't have their full roster in the playoffs with Demko being injured. I think that is a concern, but when he's healthy, he's a Vezina caliber guy. A lot to like if you're a Vancouver Canucks fan. I think that this team is going to continue to grow. Hopefully they can find that same success and this wasn't just a fluke year from them. I believe in this roster. I think they got slightly better, but I do think that other teams in their division also got pretty good as well. So I'm going to finish them at number 2. Slight regression, just so slightly, but I still see them making the playoffs and being one of the top teams in the Pacific Division. And coming in at number 1, this should surprise no one, I have the Edmonton Oilers. Difficult ending to their season last year, losing in the Stanley Cup Finals, the highest place that Edmonton has ever gotten with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. I expect them to be in the same position that they were last year, and I think this roster actually improved, acquiring players like Jeff Skinner on a bargain deal, Victor Arvidsson, and then also having a little bit more sustainability with Stuart Skinner, knowing that he's going to be your number 1 this year and that you really don't have a lot of questions about his performance in the postseason. Who knows what's going to happen with the Leon Draisaitl contract? You kept Adam Henrique, you kept Corey Perry, you have your depth now. Hopefully Zach Hyman can put up a similar year that he did last year. Moving Ryan Nugent-Hopkins up to the top line should also aid in that. Jeff Skinner, if he can find his game again after being bought out by Buffalo, it could be very beneficial to this team. I expect Edmonton to be just as good as last year, if not better. This team has all of the makings to win a Stanley Cup. Of course, you have your questions like, will Darnell Nurse actually live up to his contract? But that kind of feels like it was tossed out the window because of the step forward from Evan Bouchard. And then, of course, Matthias Ekholm being so steady. You kind of could reduce his role and not have him being the number 1 guy, which worked better with his game, I guess, if that makes sense. But honestly, outside of that Darnell Nurse thing, I feel like this team is built for a Stanley Cup championship. And like I said, I have them finishing number 1 in this division. They could finish number 2, 1 or 2 spots with the Canucks. I don't think it makes a huge difference, but those are clearly the top 2 teams. And I have Edmonton just edging out the Canucks by a couple points. I think that they're just slightly better at this point. But this is my NHL Pacific Division prediction. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? What would you change about my list, or do you just agree entirely? Comment all that good stuff below. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll see you guys in the next one.